India is going through a spell of religion-based, ideology-based intolerance. The acuteness of this intolerance varies from region to region. In a place like Kerala, for example, it's at its lowest. It's nearly absent, though one gets the ominous feeling that the virus of intolerance is gradually spreading into the society of Kerala as well. At least it seems that attempts are being made to pollute the pristine beauty of the psyche of Kerala with the poison of communal intolerance. Am I particularly worried about this phase of intolerance that we are going through? Perhaps I would surprise many if I say I'm not. I'm not. It's extremely unfortunate that we have to go through this phase. It's painful, it's traumatic. Sometimes when acute events happen, it questions the very sense of India that we have fondled, loved, cherished these many years. I, for one, have always deemed it a very special privilege to be an Indian. This is no exaggeration. Even today, I affirm with all my conviction that the best place to be in is India. I find India intellectually very stimulating. I find the context of India conducive to the deeper thirst of the soul. I feel that while I am in India, I am in closer touch with the ground realities of the human condition. A feeling I never get when I travel abroad. Therefore, I have always cherished with very special feelings and sentiments the fact of being an Indian. And therefore, you would ask me, how come then that you are not traumatized by these instances, however sporadic and random, of intolerance, particularly religion-based intolerance. And from religion, intolerance will naturally and necessarily spread to politics, because religion has very little operating power. The power to affect, the power to impact, the power to hurt rests with the state. And therefore, for the practitioners of religion or the representatives of a religion to practice intolerance, it needs the patronage of the state. And in saying so, I am stating a truism. Therefore, I don't wish to argue this any further. Then why is it that I am not concerned? I'm not cynical about what's going on. It's because, and I share with you for what this might be worth for you, it's because deep down I have a very firm conviction that India has to go through this transition period. In my opinion, our country is in a stage of transition. We are transitioning from a tradition-bound society to a new society. And therefore, it's not an accident, nor is it irrelevant that Sri Narendra Modi claims himself to be the harbinger of the new Bharat, the new India. He has consciously set himself the task of bringing out the old and bringing in the new. He is virtually the Christmas father, if you like, of the new Bharat. Whether or not he is destined to be so, whether it is a role that he has appropriated in a kind of self-centered, megalomaniacal mission, time alone will prove. But the fact is that he takes this with dead earnestness, and he's not merely talking about it, and he's also doing whatever he can to move in that direction and move a large country like ours in that direction, which is no small task. So when a country moves from its traditional foundations and is dragged to a new foundation, it is to be expected that this interim period, this period of transition, would be one of trauma, and many people will suffer during this period of time. And not merely the so-called designated victims. Suffering will engulf practically all members of the society in one form or another. And you will begin to see the truthfulness, the relevance of what I am saying in the near future. So I expect India to go through a period of far greater turmoil and trauma than we have seen so far. We have seen bad days, but this is nothing compared to what lies ahead. India has to necessarily transition from the old to the new. Nothing stays frozen or arrested in history. History is like a river, it must flow forward. A river is a river precisely because it changes. As Lord Buddha said, it's a river because it flows forward. Change is its very logic. History is similar to that. Therefore, when I meditate on history, I'm quite happy to factor in the reality and the necessity for change. And this is true not only of India but of all countries in the world. In order to understand this aspect of history, let's look at a scenario which is very far away from us, because objective, unbiased thinking that does not breed defensiveness in people, is better undertaken with reference to something far away from us. Distance facilitates unemotional, unsentimental objectivity, which is what is required when we reflect on historical patterns and themes, such as the one that we are handling in this video. Let's take the example of the birth of the liberal vision in Europe. Now today, of course, we talk about liberalism. We talk about our liberal democracy. We talk about the liberal culture. St. Stephen's at one point was considered to be the nursery of the liberal culture in education, and the people who used these words gave me the impression often that they did not really understand the full implications of what they were mouthing, but that's not my main theme today, or main focus today. So historically, the liberal vision, the idea of the liberal society, or if you like the more familiar expression, the open society, happened in Europe, and it happened in the 17th century. And there is a context to the birth of the liberal vision and the liberal culture. That's a very prolonged wars of religion that traumatized both England and Denmark, England and Holland. England and Holland. Sectarian wars between two factions of Christianity, Protestants and Catholics. Europe was convulsed with these religious wars. The extent of cruelty that was practiced, the degree of human suffering that was occasioned, the destruction, the devastation, the satanic attitudes that it fostered, it's one of the most lamentable phases of the history of Christianity. Fortunately, after this prolonged period of war-induced turmoil and suffering, people with better senses in both countries, that is England and Holland, began to publicly express their dissatisfaction with whatever was happening, whatever was being done in the name of religion. And they realized that there was something extremely funny and unnatural about both sides of the war sounding extremely confident, dogmatically confident about the justness of their cause. The Catholics were absolutely convinced that the cause that they were fighting was godly, just, and therefore it could not be compromised. Likewise, the Protestants, their antagonists in the war. So it was two absolute rights sort of ramming into each other like mountain goats, locking horns with each other. But this 130 years long war generated enough human suffering, lasting 3-4 generations, that people finally said enough is enough. So you have authors like Locke, John Locke, coming up with the idea that it's dangerous for people to be so dogmatic and so cocksure about things religious. After all, religion comprises mostly arbitrary assumptions that are handed down from one generation to another, and assumptions that are not subject to the test of reason and of human experience. And therefore, rather than subject human beings for generations on end to the trauma and the tragedy of religion incited wars, and religion serving as a point or as a catalytic agent of intolerance, Locke in particular argued that we should now shift from intolerance to tolerance. So the shaping idea of liberalism is that if there is a dispute, if there is a difference of opinion, and differences of opinion are bound to come up when people interact, when there is a difference of opinion, or there are differences of opinion, the right thing is not to fight. The right thing is to dialogue. The right thing is for both parties to realize that their positions, which they otherwise assume to be absolute and immaculate, free from all blemish, the final truth, to realize with some degree of humility that the positions that they are espousing are actually relative, and that neither party has a monopoly of the truth, and therefore they need to approach each other with some degree of openness and some degree of uncertainty about the positions that they are espousing. So long as I remain absolutely convinced that what I am saying, what I am advocating is the absolute truth, I renounce the freedom to be humble. I renounce the freedom to listen to the other who has a different opinion to myself. And therefore, I also renounce the freedom to compromise where, in the interest of peace and sanity, I need to compromise. After all, what I am required to compromise is in relation to something which is of relative value. Religion comprises mostly of man-made ideas, assumptions, and agendas, which unfortunately are given the label of revelation, and therefore people renounce the freedom to make the slightest change or slightest concession to those who happen to hold a slightly different view, therefore making the interface between not only religions but also denominations one of extreme cruelty and intolerance. Thinkers like John Locke in England and Voltaire in France. Voltaire's famous work in this context is titled Treatise on Toleration. Treatise on Toleration. I think it was written sometime in the 1770s. It became a major influence on European thinking. It's one of the classic texts in liberalism. Therefore, I would commend my readers to consult this. It's not a very huge book, it's a tiny volume, very movingly written. It takes up a particular instance of religious cruelty, a highly mistaken instance of persecution inflicted because on a hapless victim because of this religious intolerance. So, Locke in particular emphasized the fallibility of human judgments and created an intellectual climate conducive to dialogue mutual listening to each other with some degree of openness of mind and mutual respect. And this created an environment of peace which lasted till 1914, which of course marks the outbreak of the First World War. So that period was a period of relative calm, but this birth of liberalism was preceded by a period of religious intolerance and extreme human suffering, which paved the way for the emergence of the liberal view. I believe that India has to go through a similar phase. It's a historical imperative. I'm sorry to have to say this, but whether you like it or not, whether I like it or not, historical imperatives will have their way. All we can do is to be historically aware of these patterns and see how best such a period of transition is to be negotiated. The point is, and this is extremely important, and this is the heart of my argument, a people who are situated in an epochal period of transition, or in a period of epochal transition, they need to be specially trained for the purpose. It's not easy to cope with the traumas generated by conflicts of this kind. In fact, it generates extreme bewilderment. And this can actually undermine the mental health of large sections of the society. This is called post-trauma, post-distress trauma, psychological trauma, and it can have very serious manifestations, and it can burden a society with all kinds of health consequences, which also will have naturally economic consequences. It will take a toll on the social health of a nation, and it can unnecessarily prolong spells of social anarchy, so on and so forth. So it's imperative, if we care for our country, our society, that we realize that there is a very special task to be undertaken at the present time, and that is realizing that we are living through, and actually we are entering, a very significant period of historical transition from one state to another, from a kind of naturally inherited state of tolerance into a period of intolerance, where India will languish for a while, and it will emerge from that state maybe after 40 years, 50 years, we do not know. Nobody can read the future and find out how many years or decades this period will last. Historical time scale is different from the time scale of human beings. Our lives are much shorter compared to the span of history. So during this period of time, people need a lot of understanding, a lot of training, a lot of preparation to cope with this period of stress and strain. The context of stress, the context of suffering cannot be modified, it cannot be resisted. All that we can do is to enable people to recognize this to be a historical necessity, number one. Number two, to underline the fact that people are going to need far greater degrees of inner strength, inner fortitude, inner cohesion to handle this period of stress and strain. And if they manage to do that, they will become extremely productive, and that's the positive side of this. For example, if you look at the two world wars, the First World War and the Second World War, you will see that in both instances, soon after the huge convulsion of these massive mammoth wars subsided, Europe and to an extent also North America witnessed a tremendous, most beautiful, sublime outbreak of creativity. It's amazing how it happens. But not everybody actually moves into that. Only people who acquire the intellectual, spiritual, inner strengths to cope with periods of stress and strain will be able to turn a period of trauma into a period of intellectual and spiritual creativity, acquiring greater depth and greater heights. So this task needs to be undertaken, and is fundamentally a spiritual task. I use the word spiritual advisedly because religion has nothing to do with it, because it's religion that creates the spirit of intolerance. If you leave politics alone, I tell you, political ideologies cannot create this kind of maniacal, insane intolerance. This can be created, the malignancy of which intensified only if political ideology takes the help of religion. Because then cruelty can be perpetrated in the name of God and for the sake of God. And as Voltaire said very aptly, he said, no man is a more cheerless killer than the one who believes that he is killing for the sake of his God. So that one statement by Voltaire is enough to convince us the extent to which political ideologies can go berserk when they are hitched to religious prejudices and religious animosities. So, India needs to go through this phase so that it can emerge into a true liberal culture. I have no doubt at all that ultimately we are headed towards a liberal culture. What's the difference between the period that we are leaving behind and the period to which we are moving? Well, in the period that we are leaving with, we did not have many religious conflicts. But that was not a liberal culture. It is an orthodox culture. And in that culture, opinions were very hardened. There was no negotiation between religions with open minds, open hearts. Then how was peace and harmony preserved? By each religion confining itself within its own allotted enclaves or protected territories, designated territories. And whenever there was a crisscrossing, it generated heat and anger and anguish and reprisals, reactions, as in the case of conversions undertaken mostly by Christians but also to a lesser extent by Muslims. So, conversion is not a liberal project at all. Conversion is the belligerence of orthodoxy. And if you try to hold conversation with a practitioner of conversion so as to persuade him or even to drag him into an open-minded conversation about the fundamental premises of conversion, you'll hit the dead end. A person has to be inflexibly dogmatic to be able to practice conversion as zealously as he needs to if he is to earn any trophies by way of converting others. This is the reason why in a multi-religious society there is a serious problem with conversion, which unfortunately Christians refuse to recognize because they think they have a divine mandate to convert others, not realizing that Jesus also said, treat others as you would like to be treated by them, just as we wouldn't like anyone to come and poach within our religious community and take people away from us, steal our sheep as it were. No one else also would like us to do the same to them. And there the teaching of Jesus Christ is on the dot. Do to others what you would that they should do to you, or to put it more appropriately, do not do to others what you wouldn't like them to do to you. As simple as that. So the period that we are leaving behind was not a period of liberal culture at all. Though attempts were made to create a semblance, an illusion of liberality within certain pockets, particularly the pockets of the elite. So as far as St. Stephen's College is concerned, which is an institution that I know like the back of my hand, liberalism was equated with elitism. It's a very funny thing, but since that is not the main point of my concern here, I am not going to take you in that direction. So we have to go through this very traumatic period of clashes, conflicts, so that people can see for themselves the suicidal folly of the dogmatic assumptions and presumptions that they entertain in the name of religion. Religion being as deep-rooted as it is, it's impossible to convince anyone who takes this religion seriously that there could be something seriously wrong with any of their assumptions. It doesn't, religions make no difference in this. Every religion is as dogmatic as the other. Though there is a tendency to say that the Abrahamic religions are more dogmatic than others. Maybe marginally so, but if you challenge the fundamental or central tenet of any religion, the reprisal will be very swift and brutal. Then you will see how tolerant and how tame a religious tradition is. So, we need to actually outgrow this, because that model, the model of religions being kept in watertight compartments so that they don't come into contact with each other and generate sparks of communal riots or intolerance, that has to be discarded. We have to outgrow that, and we have to reach a stage in which people realize that all these religious ideas, while they have their relevance, all of them are relative. All of them are relative, because anything that is related to the process of living, where everything is moving forward, everything is changing, any idea, any dogma, any assumption which is absolute will only act as a clog, as a kind of burden on this forward movement. It will actually paralyze the forward movement. So, a religion which is living, a living religion, a living faith, must and will retain its flexibility as opposed to its dogmatic, rock-like inflexibility. Inflexibility arrests the flow of life, whereas that fluidity is more akin to the flow of life. And in the days ahead, in the kind of genuine liberal culture that's going to be born in the Indian context, maybe 40, 50 years from now, you will reach that stage of people reckoning that their religious heritage is valuable. At the same time, every ingredient of that is also relative, that nobody has any monopoly or absolute control over all the truths, and that we need to listen to each other. At any rate, we should not assign to religious ideas and agendas such absolute verity, absolute importance and absolute priority, that everything else is set on fire for the sake of a religious principle or a religious notion or bias, which is insufferably stupid. Right now, if I say that these things are stupid, I'll be stoned to death. But a time is coming when people like me will stand in the open and say that, all that was very stupid, and they will be thanked for it. And the duty, the function, or the mission of a person like me is to endure the interregnum, the interim period, take the beating, and keep repeating the same thing, that we need to leave the old baggage behind and move towards that stage of genuine liberalism, liberality, which alone is conducive to peace, tolerance, and harmonious coexistence, without which humanity really has no progress. And I, for one, look forward in hope and anticipatory gratitude to the dawn of that age, though I know for sure that physically I will not be alive and around to see the dawn of that new age. But I hail it as a beautiful prospect for human species to which I am proud to belong. And I feel happy for the coming generations, that they will be the happy inheritors of the healthy fruits of the mammoth suffering through which India transitioned from the old to the new. Thank you. Jai Hind.